Stay still for a second. Feel that shift in the air. Good, because that's the sound of an entire population pretending nothing's wrong. You noticed it before anyone else because you've always been tuned to what lives underneath the surface. Long before words collapse, long before masks slip, long before people admit what they already feel. You were the one who sensed tension in rooms that looked calm, fractures in smiles that looked convincing, exhaustion hiding behind confidence. Not because you were suspicious, but because you were attentive. There was a time you didn't realize this was a skill. You thought it was sensitivity. You thought it was overthinking. You thought maybe something was wrong with you for noticing so much while others seemed comfortable staying unaware, so you softened yourself. You explained things away. You gave people the benefit of the doubt even when your body was already signaling the truth. You were open then, accommodating, emotionally generous in a way that didn't keep score. You listened longer than you should have. You stayed when clarity was already asking you to leave. You translated other people's confusion into excuses so you wouldn't have to confront the cost of your own honesty. You didn't want to be difficult. You didn't want to be cold. You didn't want to be the one who disrupted the peace. What you didn't see yet was that you were paying for harmony with self-abandonment, and slowly, quietly, that began to wear on you. Not in some dramatic collapse, not in an explosion of anger, but in a steady accumulation of moments where you felt unseen even while being present, where you felt misunderstood even while explaining yourself clearly, where you felt drained not by effort, but by the constant act of shrinking your perception so others could stay comfortable. The breaking point didn't arrive as a crisis. It arrived as clarity one moment. Something inside you simply refused to keep pretending, refused to keep absorbing emotional weight that wasn't yours, refused to keep explaining obvious truths to people invested in misunderstanding you. It wasn't bitterness, it wasn't resentment, it was recognition. You realized that kindness without boundaries isn't generosity, it's erosion. So you stopped, not dramatically, not loudly. You didn't announce a transformation. You didn't confront everyone who wronged you. You didn't rewrite history to make yourself look strong. You just became more precise, more selective, more honest with yourself about what you were feeling and why. And that's when the shift began. Your calm changed first. Before, your calm was a coping mechanism, a way to avoid conflict, to smooth tension, to keep things moving. Now, your calm is anchored. It doesn't rush to resolve what isn't yours to fix. It doesn't absorb what isn't yours to carry. It doesn't collapse under pressure just to maintain access. You don't react the same way anymore. You pause. You observe. You let information arrive fully before responding. And that pause, that quiet space, is where people start to feel something different around you. Not fear, not intimidation, but awareness. When someone speaks to you now, they feel themselves more clearly. Their words don't float past unnoticed. Their contradictions don't hide as easily. Their emotional shortcuts don't land the way they used to. Not because you're challenging them, but because you're no longer compensating for them. You don't rush to reassure insecurity. You don't rush to fix discomfort. You don't rush to smooth over misalignment. And in that stillness, truth gets louder. Some people find that refreshing. They feel steadier around you, safer, more grounded. They sense that they don't have to perform or exaggerate to be understood. With you, clarity is enough. Others feel exposed. They don't always know why. They just know that the usual strategies don't work. The overconfidence feels thin. The rehearsed narratives feel brittle. The emotional manipulation doesn't find a place to land. And because you aren't attacking them, they can't defend themselves. They're left alone with their own behavior. That's the part they struggle with. You didn't become distant, you became discerning. You didn't become cold, you became clear. You didn't lose empathy, you learned where it belongs. Your presence now has a different weight to it, not because you're heavier, but because you're no longer leaking energy in every direction. You're contained, integrated. Whole and wholeness has a way of reorganizing spaces without effort. When you walk into conversations now, things slow down. Not artificially, naturally. People think before they listen more carefully. They notice themselves mid-sentence. Again, not because you're imposing anything, but because your steadiness removes the noise they usually hide behind. You don't chase understanding anymore. You let it come to you, and that changes the dynamic completely. There was a time you would have explained yourself to prevent misinterpretation. Now you trust that those who are capable of understanding will do so without translation. You've learned that clarity doesn't require volume, and truth doesn't need urgency. The world around you hasn't suddenly become more honest. People haven't magically changed, but your relationship to their behavior has. You no longer personalize what was never about you. You no longer internalize confusion that belongs. You no longer bend your boundaries to preserve familiarity. And yes, some people notice that something is different. They might not have the language for it, but they feel it. Conversations don't flow the same way. Access isn't automatic anymore. Your availability has shape now. Your attention has limits. Your silence has intention. This is where misunderstandings begin to dissolve, not because you correct them, but because time does the work. When you stay consistent, when your words align with your behavior, when your calm doesn't fracture under pressure, narratives lose momentum. Exaggerations can't sustain themselves. Accusations collapse under their own weight. People start comparing what was said about you with what they actually experience, and slowly, perception recalibrates. You didn't ask for that correction. You didn't demand recognition. You didn't seek validation. You just stayed aligned. That's the part most people don't understand. They think change requires force. They think clarity needs confrontation. They think truth has to be defended aggressively or it disappears. But you've learned something quieter and more durable. Truth doesn't need protection when it's lived consistently. So you keep moving the way you move now, measured, present, aware. You don't flinch when the air changes because you've already learned how to stay grounded. When things get uncomfortable, you don't rush to reinsert yourself into noise just to feel included. You don't trade self-respect for access. And the world adjusts, not all at once, not dramatically, but inevitably. Because integrity has a rhythm that outlasts performance, and calm, real calm, built from self-knowledge and boundaries, has a way of exposing what can't stand on its own. You're not trying to wake anyone up. You're not trying to prove a point. You're not trying to be seen as different. You're just no longer pretending you're the same. And that's where this continues. And as this continues, you start to notice something subtle but undeniable. The noise around you hasn't disappeared. It's just stopped reaching you the same way. Conversations still happen. Opinions still circulate. People still project. Assume, exaggerate, but none of it hooks into you like it used to. You hear it, register it, and let it pass without absorbing the charge. That's not detachment, that's discernment. Before, every misunderstanding felt like something you had to correct. Every tension felt like something you had to manage. Every emotional shift in a room felt like your responsibility to stabilize. You carried that weight because you thought awareness meant obligation. You thought noticing meant fixing. Now you know better. Awareness is not a contract. Clarity is not consent. Understanding does not mean self-sacrifice. You still care deeply, but you no longer confuse care with self-erasure. That's why people react differently to you now. Some can't quite name it, but they feel that you're no longer available in the same way, not emotionally withdrawn, just no longer accessible to chaos. You don't rush to fill silence. You don't soften your truth to make it easier to swallow. You don't adjust your tone to manage other people's comfort. And for the people who relied on that version of you, this feels like loss. They might say you changed. They might say you're distant. They might say you're different now. They're right, but not in the way they think. You didn't change into someone else. You returned to yourself, the version of you that no longer negotiates with internal alarms. The version of you that trusts your first perception instead of gaslighting it away. The version of you that understands that peace isn't passive, it's protected. What's interesting is how quickly patterns reveal themselves once you stop interfering with them. When you no longer rush to explain, people explain themselves. When you no longer rescue, people reveal their coping mechanisms. When you no longer overgive, you see who was only present for the overflow. And none of this feels cruel to you. It feels clean. You're not watching people fail. You're watching systems behave exactly as designed once you stop holding them together. That's a hard truth for some to face, especially those who benefited from your emotional labor without ever acknowledging it. But you don't announce this realization. You don't weaponize it. You don't turn it into a lecture. You simply stop participating in dynamics that require you to be smaller than you are. Your presence now carries a kind of steadiness that doesn't argue with confusion. It lets it exist until it collapses under its own contradictions. You've learned that clarity doesn't need to be loud to be effective. It just needs to be consistent. And consistency is where everything starts to shift. People begin to notice that you don't contradict yourself, that your words today align with your actions tomorrow, that your boundaries don't fluctuate based on who's watching, that your calm doesn't disappear under pressure. This is unsettling for anyone who relies on instability to maintain control. Because instability creates leverage, inconsistency creates openings, emotional reactivity creates access, and you've closed those doors quietly. Not with walls, with awareness. You're not guarded, you're grounded. You're not hardened, you're integrated. The softness that once left you vulnerable is still there, but it's now paired with structure. Compassion now moves alongside discernment. Empathy now knows when to step back. That balance is rare, and people feel it. Some feel relieved around you. They sense that they don't have to perform, that they don't have to exaggerate or posture to be taken seriously around you. Truth is enough. Others feel uncomfortable. Their usual patterns don't land. Their emotional shortcuts don't work. Their need for control doesn't find traction. And instead of blaming their tactics, they sometimes blame you. You let them not because you agree, but because you understand that clarity doesn't require defense. You've learned that not every misunderstanding is yours to resolve, and not every narrative is yours to correct. Time does that better. When you remain steady, exaggeration burns itself out. When you stay quiet, contradictions grow louder. When you don't react, people are forced to sit with their own energy. That's the part no one prepares you for, how powerful non-participation can be. Not apathy, not avoidance, but conscious non-engagement with what no longer aligns. You still show up, but differently. You show up whole. You don't fragment yourself to fit expectations. You don't translate your boundaries into apologies. You don't preemptively soften your truth to avoid discomfort. And because of that, your words land with more weight now. When you speak, it's intentional. When you listen, it's complete. When you choose silence, it's not absence, it's information. People sense this. Even if they don't articulate it, they feel that your presence has structure, that you're not drifting emotionally, that you're anchored. And anchoring energy changes environments. Rooms settle faster when you're in them. Conversations get more honest, or they end sooner. Conflict doesn't escalate as easily, not because you suppress it, but because you don't feed it. You don't mirror chaos back anymore. You don't amplify insecurity. You don't absorb emotional static. You let people encounter themselves. And that encounter is where growth either begins or resistance does. You're fine with either. That's another shift you've noticed. You're no longer invested in being liked by everyone. You're invested in being aligned with yourself. Approval has lost its grip. Validation has lost its urgency, not because you're above connection, but because you've learned the cost of connection without self-respect. You no longer overextend to maintain access. You don't chase closure from people who thrive on ambiguity. You don't explain your boundaries to those committed to misunderstanding them. You conserve your energy now, not out of fear, out of wisdom. And the irony is, this conservation makes you more available where it actually matters. Your attention is cleaner. Your care is deeper. Your presence is more nourishing because it's no longer depleted. People who are ready for that meet you there. People who aren't fall away naturally. No drama, no confrontation, just alignment doing what it does best. You've also noticed something else. You don't feel the need to announce your growth. You don't feel compelled to perform healing. You don't narrate your evolution. You live it, and living it has consequences, quiet ones, but real. People who once spoke confidently about you now hesitate, not because you confronted them, but because their stories don't hold up next to your consistency. People who once underestimated you begin reassessing, not because you demanded recognition, but because time exposed the gaps in their assumptions. You didn't prove them wrong. Reality did. And you stayed out of the way long enough for that to happen. This is where your relationship with silence changed completely. Silence is no longer something you endure. It's something you use with intention. It's where you listen for what isn't being said. It's where you feel alignment or misalignment before words catch up. Silence isn't emptiness anymore. It's data, and you trust yourself with it. That trust is what makes your presence feel different now. Not intimidating, not overwhelming, just unmistakably grounded. People don't feel judged by you. They feel seen, and being seen, truly seen, can be uncomfortable for those who haven't looked at themselves honestly in a long time. You don't force that mirror on anyone. You just exist in your clarity, and clarity has a way of reflecting. You're no longer the person who absorbs everyone else's emotional weather. You've learned to check the forecast without stepping into the storm. You've learned that peace isn't something you negotiate for. It's something you maintain through boundaries and self-trust. That's the real transformation. Not louder, not colder, not harder. Clearer, and this clarity doesn't isolate you. It filters your world. It makes space for interactions that are mutual, conversations that are honest, connections that don't require performance or sacrifice. You move forward now without urgency, without needing to convince anyone of who you are, without dragging old narratives behind you. You let people meet you where you actually are, and that's where this is heading. Because this is where everything settles into something steady, not an ending. A rhythm. You don't announce this version of yourself. You don't defend it. You don't explain the shifts that led you here. You simply live from a place that no longer negotiates with chaos, and the world adjusts quietly around that. You notice how little you react. Now, how pauses feel natural instead of awkward. How silence no longer asks to be filled. You're not withholding, you're listening. And that listening keeps you aligned with yourself, instead of scattered across other people's expectations. There's a calm in knowing you don't have to prove your growth. It shows up in how you choose, how you step back, how you stay present without overextending. You don't chase understanding anymore. You trust that those who are ready will feel it without instruction. Some others lean in more honestly. Both outcomes feel clean, necessary. You've stopped measuring connection by intensity and started recognizing it by ease. You don't feel the need to rush clarity or force resolution. You've learned that time is an ally when you're consistent. Truth doesn't need defending when your behavior stays intact. So, you move forward like this. Now, grounded, observant whole, not louder, not harder, just clearer. And clarity, when it's lived instead of performed, becomes its own protection.